1 minute?
No, I think it works.
Yes, it works. It's just by
Works. Hello, hello. Yeah.
Hello. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this DPO track panel on breaking silos, how DPO works better together. DPOs plays a critical role within the organization to advise in management, but also building compliance program. They are advisor of the controller, also the processor, but they also have a role to increase to ensure the awareness raising of the staff. And they're also in contact with the data protection authorities and the individuals. And at the same time, the regulatory expectation are, especially in the digital economy, is becoming more complex and also more international. So DPOs may sometimes feel isolated, and for that reason, building network and cooperating between themselves may be very helpful. In this environment of today, the question is not so much whether DPOs should collaborate between each other, but how they should collaborate effectively while preserving their independence, credibility, and operational role within the organization. And this collaboration can take many forms. DPO associations are useful for this. For instance, DPO can share information, they can develop their expertise, and they also avoid to reinvent the wheel and to find a solution individually while they can be found together. What I hope to achieve in this panel with the discussion is to explore what type of collaboration already exists in practice between DPOs, but also to look at the relation between the data protection authorities and the DPOs. And the purpose is to try to get some inspirational ideas that can be useful for you in your daily life and daily work. I'm very fortunate today to have a panel representing several complementary perspectives. Thomas Ajuda, representing the AFCDP, the French Association of Data Protection Authorities, with insight into the operational realities of that association and the needs of DPO at national level. That's Thomas. And then Paul, next, representing CEDPO, an umbrella association of DPO. Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Then Benedict Ravens, she's head of the accountability advice sector of the DPS supervision and enforcement units, in charge of the cooperation between the DPS and the DPO network of the European institution, bodies, offices, and agencies. And then next to me, Daniel Okma is DPO at Uber, and he may bring some practical experience of an in-house DPO. So I will start with this question of the added value of a DPO association, and with you, Paul. What does a DPO gain from a national association that they cannot easily obtain alone? And what kind of added value can CDPO bring to complement the work of national associations?
Thank you very much, Isabel, and good morning, everybody. It's a great question because obviously we do have national member state associations, data protection and DPO associations at the member state level, and obviously CEDPO is the European umbrella organization for many of those associations. So we can speak to the European institutions on their behalf. Just to sort of talk about the added value of national associations, I think what's important is being a member of an association allows you to be a member of a like-minded professional community. So a community from which, as a DPO, you can grow and thrive both professionally at either at entry or at senior levels. And I think it's important generally for professionals, whether it's DPO or other, to seek a professional network once you enter the workforce, because it's a solid foundation for continuous learning and keeping one's professional know-how up to date. So the ROI on that, I think, is quite extensive. And I think it's often overlooked by HR departments as a cost-effective option to an expensive training program, for example. We're talking about national associations. I think what's important is with the advent and the coming into force of the GDPR in 2018, there was a very nascent nature of the profession DPOs. Obviously, they'd existed in Germany, I think, since the early 70s, but it was a relatively new profession in that regard or function within organizations. And to that end, I think DPOs needed to establish themselves quickly and they needed to learn fast. So I think that, from a National Data Protection Association, this is quite important because it gives you proximity. And I think at the national level, there's also cultural awareness and likeness with respect to the role and the level of acceptance within the immediate business environment. And so I think where the national associations were able to give that sort of anchor to DPOs at the national level in order to be able to establish their role within organizations. What's also important, and I think it's sometimes underestimated or overlooked, is that national member state associations also allow members to converse in their national language. The EU is obviously 27 member states, lots of different languages and dialects across Europe. And so I think where the national member state associations provide that home is for people to be able to converse very comfortably in their national language. And that is, again, by extension, the culture. It remains a partial barrier to European integration. So I think the national associations are very important in that regard. From the CEDPO perspective, we, as a European organization, allow national members and their members, so the individuals of those members, we allow them to broaden their horizons and to look to data protection scenarios and situations from a pan-European advantage. I think that is important. This may be driven by cross-border business, though importantly, a good number of DPOs have a natural interest in EU business and regulatory environments. And while no one size fits all, the strength of CEDPO is to provide a more uniform approach to the DPO role and its function, as well as data protection practice across the EU and the European Economic Area. And this is very core to the mission statement of CEDPO as a European organization. So we're a platform from which we can amass a collective intelligence, both practical and theoretical, around the role of the DPO. And we're also there to be able to answer EU public consultations, be it by the European Commission, by the EDPS or the EDPB. We provide also we publish a lot of guidelines for our members across borders through knowledge products such as position papers. We do FAQ papers on the intersects between the GDPR and the AI Act, for example. We hold events, we hold webinars, surveys, and all of these different products are there to really bring a community of EU DPO and data protection practitioners together so they can exchange and really share across borders. So I think that's sort of the distinction between the national and the European level. So we kind of, for lack of a better example, we're the European arm of our members, of our national EU members. So the CEDPO is really seen as the European arm of the French Association, the German Association, the Italian Association, and so forth. So that's really, I think, the critical relationship between national and European. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. So you made a reference to the fact that in some countries, DPO association exists since longer than others,
Sure.
etc.
Yeah.
So in France, Thomas, there is a long tradition of DPO, and then the association exists also since many years. Do you have element to add to what Paul said on the usefulness of the association in France, but also have more concrete questions? Because I heard that in the French DPO association, you developed platforms so that the DPO can have some more practical support. So I would like to learn also how the association is creating trust so that the DPO will be able to ensure real cases in really practical examples and feel safe enough to be able to do that. And also, I think in France, there are also some subgroups like working group relating to different sectors to be more pragmatic and useful than for the different sectors, etc. Can you please provide more information on that?
Thank you, Isabel. I think the key point is that the National DPO Association is not just a smaller version of European association. It plays a totally different role. European level cooperation, as Paul said, is essential for consistency and cross-border dialogue. But national DPO association bring proximity, trust, and operational support. At AFCDP, this is very concrete. The association brings together over 7,000 data protection professionals, not only DPOs. One of our most important services is our collaborative platform, Agora. where members follow the life of the association, register for events, join working groups, access deliverables, ask questions, comments, and connect with peers. So Agora is not simply an IT tool, it is the operating system of the association. And I think this is where national associations have a very specific added value. We are able to create a professional community that is close enough, culturally and legally, for people to share real operational problems. A public LinkedIn group cannot do the same thing. On a public platform, people perform. In a closed professional community, people can ask for help. That difference is very important for DPOs because they do not only need guidance, they need a space where they can ask, how do you handle this in practice? I am the only one facing this issue. How do you explain this risk to management? These are not always a question for the regulator, they are peer questions. Trust is therefore essential, and trust takes time. It does not come from a platform alone, it comes from the history of the association. We have been here for since 2004. It comes from moderation, from a membership charter, and from clear rules on publication and confidentiality. And above all, from repeated positive experience between members. One important mechanism we use is that members can raise questions pseudonymously through the platform. This is very useful, especially for new members and sensitive questions. Often, what we see is that people start by asking pseudonymously, and then when they see that the community is helpful and respectful, they gain confidence and start contributing under their own name. So the association does not only answer questions, it helps DPO grow into the role. The same is true with our sectoral working groups. They are important because data protection is not experienced in the same way in every sector. A DPO in healthcare, local government, insurance, bank, or technology may apply the same GDPR, but the risk, the vocabulary, the governance, and the maturity of the organization are different. Sectoral groups allow DPO to go much deeper. They can identify shared difficulties, produce practical deliverables, compare approaches, and sometimes bring common questions to the regulator or other public authorities. They also create smaller communities within the broader association. It means that a DPO can find peers who really understand their sector and their constraints. For me, this is one of the strongest contribution of a national association and CPDP. It reduces isolation at several levels. First, you are no longer alone as a DPO. Then you are no longer alone in your sector, and sometimes you are no longer alone in your region. This local and regional dimension should not be underestimated. DPOs often need very practical exchanges, not only high-level legal discussion, meeting people nearby, building relationships over time, and knowing who you can call when a concrete issue arises is part of the value. So if I had to summarize the specific value of a national association like the CPDP, I would say that national association help build confidence in daily practice. The national level is where trust become concrete.
Thank you very much for that, Thomas. So I can see that we have it's a community, proximity, you have an opportunity to learn, to cooperate, to exchange, also to have operational support at national level. And then CDPO, you can bring an EU voice to the DPOs and also enable consistency. And also the point that you made about the sector that is so different is very interesting. This is, I personally think, why data protection is so interesting, because you can have a total different life depending on the sector you're working in, data protection. It can be so diverse. So, Benedict.
Sorry, if I could just add
yes.
one very quick point there.
Yeah.
So to what Thomas was saying is that also at the European level we have working groups, and so the working groups are quite often composed of the sectoral and thematic working groups at the local level. So it's interesting to see, for example, the exchanges between Germans, French, Spanish, Italians on common topics. And so that's something that I think is quite enriching as well. So.
Thank you, Paul, for that. So now we move at this space of the European institution, bodies, agencies that they do as well have to comply with data protection laws. So this is the EU DPR, very similar to the GDPR. So when they do process personal data, they have to respect that framework. The EDPS is the supervisory authority for that area. And in that context, there is a DPO network with which the EDPS cooperate closely. And there are regular meetings held between the EDPS and the DPO network. Could you please explain, Benedict, how this DPO network functions and how the EDPS support them in practice, this DPO network?
Yes. Thank you, Isabelle. Good morning, everyone. First, I would like to start with a few words about my role and perspective here. I feel a bit like an alien because I'm not a DPO. I'm supposed to speak about the role of DPOs, but I am not. And therefore, as a representative of a supervisory authority, my point of view will be more to explain the context in which the DPO network of the EU institutions operates and the support that we as EDPS, as supervisory authority, we can provide to this network. I would like to start with a bit of context. Isabelle already mentioned that a bit. So the processing of personal data by EU institutions is subject to a specific regulation, the GDPR for EUIs, the EU DPR, very, very similar to the GDPR. And under the EU DPR, the supervisory authority, independent supervisory authority in charge of supervising data processing is the EDPS, and the tasks and powers of the EDPS are very similar to the tasks of national supervisory authorities. Now, how does the DPO network look like at EU level, and how do they work in practice? In fact, maybe you are aware that the EU DPR obliged all EU institutions to appoint a DPO. So since we are currently supervising 78 EU institutions, bodies, offices, and agencies, it means at the same time that we are in front of a DPO network of around the same number of people. So a bit more than 70 because some EU institutions share a DPO. So that's the small ecosystem in which we operate. And in fact, the DPO network and the DPO function is well established within the EU public administration because this role already existed well before the establishment of the EDPS as supervisory authority in 2004. So it's an institution, let's say, as a tradition within the EU public administration. And today there is a robust DPO network, I would say, which structured itself in a more formal way in 2023 by adopting a charter and by appointing a board with DPOs of big institutions and also alternate members with representative of smaller institutions. And according to the charter, the purpose of the DPO network is to strengthen collaboration among DPOs across EU institutions amid growing legislative, social, and technological challenges. And to achieve this goal, the core mandate of the network includes the following: serving as a forum for discussion, facilitating knowledge sharing, producing collective outputs, and delivering training and mentoring. Now, let's come to the core of your question as to how the EDPS supports the DPO network. I would like to underline first that we have a privileged relationship with the DPOs because it's a relatively small group of people, so we have a very close relationship with them. We know them all, and we are in close contact with them throughout the year. And we provide support to the DPOs in various ways, and the first important support we provide, I think, is directly linked to a supervisory role. Because as a DPS, we have to ensure and to check and to monitor that all EUIs, as I mentioned earlier, have a DPO. So we're monitoring them, a DPO that is appointed for a minimum term of time. It's between 3 and 5 years under the EU DPR. And also that the DPO is registered with the DPS. And thanks to this monitoring, we always have an updated list of the DPO network members. And we put this list at the disposal of the DPO, so DPO network. So the DPOs and the deputy DPOs, when there is one, which means that, and it's exclusively put at the disposal of the DPO network through a platform for them. So when a DPO wants to contact a fellow DPO in another EU institution, they exactly know, they go to the list and they know that the person they will find there is the person in place at the moment. Same for the DPO network, when they want to, or the board, when they want to reach out the whole network, they use our list. And apart from this list, we support the DPO community in several manners. Of course, there are guidance, general guidance, but I would like to focus more on the cooperative channels here. And the few concrete examples are as follows. Twice a year, first and foremost, we organize a one-day meeting with the DPO network. And it's organized back-to-back with the meeting that the network itself organizes. So there are 2 days, 2 meetings, 2 days in a row of meetings, one with the DPO network only, and second day with EDPS. And these meetings are intended as a forum of exchange, of course, of practices and concerns, and give guidance. And typically the agenda includes presentations, updates by EDPS, and a workshop, and the meetings are also an opportunity for the DPOs to network among themselves with the EDPS, of course. And the workshop of this meeting usually consists of a case study, and we prepare this case study together with a small group of volunteer DPO that we call the DPO support group. So they help prepare that, we meet them regularly to that end, and they also moderate the workshop during the meeting. And I think this DPO support group, it's an initiative by EDPS that started a few years ago, several years ago already. And it is a good example of how the EDPS can also foster cooperation between DPOs, because sometimes these members of the DPO support group don't know each other. And thanks to this preparation of the workshop, that takes time. They get to know each other, and then they can further cooperate on other projects. And each year, the DPO support group changes. Those are volunteer DPO, but we alternate. I see here a member of the DPO support group of this year is there in front line. So it's really an interesting initiative, I think. And in addition to this biannual EDPS DPOs meeting, we also organize online thematic sessions. The last one was in April. We organized a Q&A session on the recent EDPS supervisory guidance on the position of the DPO that was issued in December. And it had a great success. Almost 100 DPOs and deputy DPOs participated. We also keep in touch with DPOs through the Quick News. It's a monthly newsletter that we send to DPOs. And the last thing I would like to mention is the wiki for DPOs that we maintain. It's a platform, again, exclusively reserved for DPOs, deputy DPOs, and also some data protection coordinators in the big institutions, where they can find an annotated EU DPR with reference to important case law, to EDPS guidance, EDPS opinions, decisions. It also includes the former issues of the Quick News. It also includes the updated list of the DPO network I mentioned earlier. And also it's a repository of EDPS presentations. I think that's a very good tool also that supports the DPOs in their daily work.
Thank you very much, Benedict. Indeed, having this small community of DPOs, then they have a kind of privileged situation and relationship with the DPA, and even that you are keeping up to date the list. So if they act as data controller, they don't have to have the risk that the list will not be up to date, because it's even the regulator that is keeping that list for them. That's really fantastic. So Daniel, you already have some years of expertise as DPO. Do you believe that a DPO association can still be useful and bring you useful information for you, or is it more useful for junior? And or maybe there is also the opportunity to have this networking in the context of association, and maybe you build then your own network with more experienced DPO with whom you will have more trust and you can have more deep cooperation. Please tell us.
So, good question as well. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Before I answer the very good question, let me completely digress and say we don't always need associations or networks to cooperate better as DPOs. I think it can be very, very useful if you are a DPO and your company is starting to work with a new processor, a new joint controller, starts a new processing with another organization, to just directly reach out to the DPO of that other organization. It makes sure that data protection interests from both parties are properly addressed. Usually, up until that point, it have been salespeople who, might not have data protection as their primary interest top of mind. So it can be very useful to just reach out directly and make sure that the other organization takes data protection seriously as well. Same happens when a government organization or law enforcement, for instance, wants to have access to certain data. When receiving that request, it can be super useful to directly reach out to the DPO of that organization to make sure that some data protection considerations have been taken to heart and are given serious consideration. But apart from the direct cooperation between DPOs, which I highly recommend, when it comes to the associations and networks, in my experience, and I've been doing this quite a while indeed, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. I think especially when it comes to the national associations of DPOs, they, from my perspective, tend to be rather heavy on public service DPOs, who kind of live in a different world than the DPOs of private sector organizations. Data processing is wildly different, their concerns are different, the way they deal with data protection is often very different. And that may make it harder to have a useful learning experience in these networks. Add to that the experience and maturity of the DPOs in those networks can vary wildly, and that makes it harder to get a useful experience. At the same time, I'm a member of 5 different DPO networks at the moment.
Which one is the best?
Let's see who we have in the room, and I'll just call that one the best. But what I find is that if you find a similar background, then it can become very, very useful to share experiences. I'm part of a DPO network that all have the Dutch DPA as their lead supervisory authority. And it can be very useful and very interesting just to share, your war stories or the adventures you've experienced with the Dutch Data Protection Authority, just to get a better understanding of the way that authority deals with all these different scenarios. I'm a member of a DPO network that has mostly people from the tech sector, from larger tech companies, and they share a certain common understanding, certain skill of processing, certain issues that are common to all these different companies. And then it can become very, very interesting to share that information, get some new perspectives and new ways of dealing with things. So to your question, is it still useful as an experienced DPO? I think the basics, not so much. I've been doing this well over 10 years. I kind of have thought about the basics. I know them. I don't need any further education on what the legal bases mean. I know what they mean. But as soon as you find a network that has more similar DPOs, similar to your own role, where you can share these experiences and maybe share some new perspectives, then it can become very, very useful. In general, it also takes time. When you just join these DPO networks, in the beginning, DPOs have it's a confidential job. You know a lot about the processing going on in your organization. You often know about stuff that is just intended processing. And you might not be too inclined and too open and too willing to share all that information outside of your own organization. So it takes time to build trust and to get to know a group of people in similar situations. But then as it opens up and as you open up, it does become very, very useful. And in the end, I think you get from it what you give to it. So that would be my advice.
Interesting. It's also what you said, Thomas. It takes some time also to build this trust and to share the experience. And then you make like your own shopping on where is the best place to get the information. I mean, based on where is your LSA, and then you will be part of this national network. And then if they are like sectorial ones that are relevant for you, then you join that one. That's
absolutely true.
So no need to be just within your country and looking at your national association, but you can also look beyond, especially if you are an organization that is cross-border. And then maybe Thomas, I also heard, because we heard that sometimes DPO, they are a bit isolated, they're also under pressure because they can face some psychological strain because they need to be between the DPA, the regulators, the management. And do you see that the French Association also has a role to play for that support?
Yes, absolutely. First, I'd like to say that most of the DPO are very happy with their job to reassure the audience, but it's true that some are facing issue, and I think the AFCDP was probably the first association to take this issue seriously about well-being and mental health. This came from the work and commitment of several active members of the association who helped launch survey and studies on the well-being and mental health of DPOs. And what the studies showed was quite serious, actually. Some DPO were not simply facing a heavy workload, but suffering deeply because of isolation, pressure, lack of recognition, being sidelined, or being placed in an impossible situation. So the AFCDP decided to act in several ways. First, by making the issue visible. This may sound simple, but it does matter. We published and discussed the studies. We organized intervention on the topic, and we brought the issue into the professional debate. Naming the problem was already an important step. Secondly, we raised the topic with the CNIL, the French DPA, and the CNIL later integrated the DPO well-being dimension into its annual questionnaire sent to DPOs, which receives several thousand responses. That was important because it moves the topic from individual perspective to a broader institutional concern. And third, a few years ago, we launched a psychological assistance line for DPOs in serious difficulty. AFCDP members can call this line and speak with a professional psychologist. The association does not know who calls. We only receive usage statistics. Some may say this is a niche service, but the reality is that the line is used every year by a dozen of DPOs. This is enough to justify the service. As privacy professional, we all understand risk-based thinking. Risk is not only about probability, it's also about severity. Here, the probability may be low, but the severity can be extremely high. So we believe it's our responsibility as an association of DPO to provide this kind of service because protecting the DPO function also means protecting the people who carry it.
Thank you, Thomas. So, so we discussed this collaboration and the role of the national association, how they can help the DPOs. But then this is like the horizontal cooperation between DPOs, but there is also vertical cooperation with data protection authorities. So the DPOs, sometimes they want to be closer to the DPA, but at the same time, there is a need to keep a safe distance with the DPO to maintain also the trust with their management. So that will be the subject matter that we address now. I turn to you, Benedict. Within the context of European institution, we saw that the DPO network is cooperating very closely with the EDPS. So the EDPS as supervisory authority holds a dual mandate, advising the DPOs on data protection matters, but also enforcing the EU DPR. How does this dual role work in practice? Do European institutions have a safe space when they seek advice and share their compliance challenges? And is there a risk that the information being shared is going to be used in the context of enforcement activities?
Thank you for this interesting question. I will start by saying that the dual mandate is the reality of any supervisory authority, right? We advise and we enforce. It's true that given the relatively small ecosystem of the EU institutions, we know the DPOs and the EUIs and their DPOs very well. and we have an in-depth knowledge of our supervisees. But I would see this more as an advantage because this close working relationship with the DPOs and the DPO network enables us to place greater emphasis on the advisory aspect of our role, and also to have it more tailored, made to the realities of the DPO network, our DPO network. So I wouldn't say that it's not good for us, especially for us. And what does it mean in practice to support them through and to put the focus and to highlight the advisory role and the support? But we have set up several channels through which DPO can approach the DPS to share concerns and seek advice. And this channel can be both informal and formal, individual or collective. So let me give a few examples of how we do that at EDPS. As individual and informal channels, I would like to mention the EDPS hotline for DPOs. So DPOs can contact the Supervision and Enforcement Unit every day to have first-line verbal advice that is totally informal. That's the first thing. And the second example is the periodical bilateral meetings that the SNE unit and the head of unit of the Supervision and Enforcement unit and the head of the Technology and Privacy units have with the DPOs of the biggest EU institutions. As collective and informal channels of communication, I can mention the regular meetings that we have with the board of the DPO network, also to share common concerns and also to align our agendas. You remember I mentioned these DPOs meetings as well as the DPO network meetings that are held back to back, but we ensure that the agendas are aligned, for example. So we meet regularly with them, with the board representing the network. We also have 2 EDPS contact points for the network, whose role is to foster cooperation and efficiency of the existing collaborative frameworks, because we have the DPO support group that I mentioned earlier. There is also the board. There is also the DPO of the EUI, that the EU institutions that organize the forthcoming meeting. We have to also coordinate this together. So it's a lot of exchanges, and the EDPS contact points can do that. And the DPO network has the name of these two persons, and I am one of them. We also have, of course, the discussion at the EDPS DPO meetings that are also informal, very broad and openly people can take the floor. For the individual and formal channels, I can mention the fact that the DPOs can always submit a request for consultation to the EDPS, and this will result in a supervisory opinion addressed to the DPO and or to the EUI, depending on the EU institution, depending on the topic and the request of the DPO. DPOs are also regularly invited to fill in surveys that are launched by the EDPS. The last one was about the DPIAs, and the previous one was about the role of the DPO. Regarding the collective and formal channels, DPOs that have a common issue to share with the DPS, they can also submit a joint request for consultations. We receive that sometimes. And we issue then a consultation, an opinion that covers the reality of several EU institutions. The network can also provide a joint contribution to a DDPS, either on request or on initiative. And here I can mention an example. At the end of last year, EDPS was working on a supervisory guidance on the role of the DPO, a new guidance. And there was a thematic working group within the DPO network that was working precisely on that matter, the DPO position. And they came up on initiative with a paper that was endorsed by the DPO network and that was shared with the DPS for a consideration while working on this supervisory guidance. And at the end, actually, we took on board most of the comments made by the DPO, the DPOs, and the key elements they wanted to see in the guidance are actually in the guidance now, the guidance that was published in December last year. And to reply more specifically, to end to your question on the safe spaces, well, the informal means I've mentioned obviously safe spaces, and even the more formal channels remain first and foremost on the advisory level. So we strive to follow a supportive approach and to promote compliance through guidance. If we advise, we do not enforce. And in this context, enforcement comes if and only if the recommendations that the DPS deem necessary, the DPS made and considered as necessary to ensure compliance are not followed. And in this context, enforcement action can be considered also as a support, a means for supporting DPO in their task, especially when they have exhausted all the capabilities they have inside, because they are, of course, very important in their organization, but there are limits. I think they still have an advisory role, so sometimes there is nothing they can do, and they need to rely on us to enforce really data protection rules. And to finish, I would like to stress that the DPS regards DPOs as partners, but not as our spies in the EU institutions. And I would like also to stress that ultimately it's the EU institution that is responsible and accountable for data protection compliance and not the DPOs. It's important to stress that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Benedict. It made me thinking that also the work that you did in this on the role of the DPO, just to make also the liaison, because I realized that I didn't even present myself, that I work for the European Data Protection Board. And in fact, we have a collaboration as well with the DPS, because the board is also it's also a body, European body. We do also have a DPO. So in practice, the DPS is our regulator when we process personal data at the DPB.
We have a DPO. You have a DPO.
We have a DPO and that do participate to those network meetings, etc. And for instance, when the DPS is making surveys, then we are addressed directly and we take part also to those surveys. And then there is also this cooperation, because within the context of the European Data Protection Board, we decided to support the role of the DPOs by making a coordinated enforcement framework action in 2023, where there were like all data protection authorities in Europe that were making enforcement action to try to see if the role of the DPO was, the DPO where the rules relating to the DPO were respected in practice, if they were like having the capacity to report directly to the management, if they are enough independent, etc. And the purpose there was also to support, in fact, the DPOs in their role and to be sure that they have all the means, the budget, and the training that they need for the role. And in that context, the DPS also took part to the enforcement activities that were coordinated globally at European level by the DPB. And also, this is also why there was this topic at the DPS, just to show this interaction and cooperation between the institution. So, Daniel, looking at you in practice, are you in favor of more cooperation between DPOs and DPAs? Is there a risk that DPOs will be then perceived on the DPA side, and then if the DPA would gather, for instance, the internal position that you made as DPO within your organization, and that was not aligned with for instance, the management decision, isn't it also a tricky situation that can happen?
So that is a tricky question. According to Article 39, one of the tasks of the DPO is to cooperate with DPAs. So if I answer this question with, no, I don't think we need to cooperate, I might get fined. But it is a minefield. It's very tricky. I would welcome more cooperation between DPOs and DPAs. We share tasks. Advising and informing the controller of their responsibilities under GDPR is something, the awareness creation is something DPAs have as one of their tasks. It is also a task of the DPO. So I think there's definitely a common ground, and there are ways in which we can cooperate better. I think it might even increase the effectiveness and the influence of the DPO if DPAs reached out directly to DPOs more and informed them of certain concerns they have with data processing, numbers of complaints they are seeing, some topics they want the DPO to focus their attention on. I think that could strengthen the position of a DPO within an organization. Just knowing there is the backing of a DPO, of a DPA, might make their position stronger. At the same time, that is in the advisory part of GDPR. When it comes to enforcement, there is not much of a role for the DPO anyway. And I think currently, in my experience, DPAs are struggling a bit with how to deal with DPOs as well, especially private sector DPOs. They either see them as part of the controller and not super relevant, or they just don't know how to involve them. And I think there are risks in that as well. One of the questions was whether or not, DPAs should directly ask for the DPO advice that has been given. And I'd strongly oppose it, because I think if DPAs start doing that and consistently ask for DPO advice, then the DPO advice becomes a risk factor to the business as well. And it might make businesses less inclined to ask openly for DPO advice. Suddenly, instead of a useful advisor and a trusted advisor, you become a liability to the organization. So yes, I'd welcome more cooperation, but in certain instances, when it comes to early concerns, or when a DPA isn't looking to start enforcement, but just wants to make sure that an organization, a controller, takes certain topics more seriously, then it's super useful to reach out to that DPO. There's an army of DPOs available you could use as a DPA to do your work for you, basically. But when it comes to the enforcement part, then I think it's less of a topic. To be honest, currently there is not super much cooperation between most of the DPAs and at least me as an individual DPO. And I think I'm also sometimes quite hesitant to reach out to DPAs asking for a question, because this was clearly expressed here. Sometimes, it should be clearly separated between advice and enforcement. And it becomes really tricky if, as a DPO, you start asking a question, do you share my opinion on this topic, to a DPA only to invite enforcement for the controller. Again, then you become a liability instead of a trusted advisor. So like with the DPO networks, I think it's time to build a bit more trust between DPOs and DPAs, and then have a better working relationship.
Before working for the European Data Protection Board, I was working at the Belgian Data Protection Authority for 10 years and working on core regulatory tools like binding corporate rules. Of course, it's for a larger organization, but there were a lot of interaction between the DPA and the DPO there, also going the same direction. It was really a win-win, because the purpose for the two of them was to improve the level of a commitment within the organization and to have solid corporate policies. So there are also some possibilities there. But then I can hear you that more in the advisory or this type of solutions, etc., not so much for enforcement. Thomas, how can DPO association can help bridge the gap between DPOs and DPAs?
Yeah, I think DPO association play a very important role in this regard. By nature, we are a trusted intermediary between the DPO community and the Data Protection Authority. As an association representing DPOs, we have access to a very professional field-based view of data protection issues. This is something that supervisory authority cannot always have in the same way. Simply because the relationship between them and DPOs is different. In France, we are very lucky because we have a very active supervisory authority. The CNIL does a lot to support DPOs, and in particular, it has a dedicated DPO support service with a strong separation between the question asked to that support service and the enforcement and sanction teams. That separation is extremely important, but even with this safeguard, some organizations and some DPOs may still hesitate to raise certain questions directly with the authority. They may fear that a question could reveal an internal weakness or a sensitive compliance issue. This is where an association can help, because we are not the regulator and because we have built trust with our members. DPOs may feel more comfortable sharing their practical concern with us. This gives us a broader and sometimes more candid view of what is happening on the ground. Then our role is to transform this field experience into something useful for the authority. We can collect feedback, identify recurring questions, filter individual cases, consolidate positions, and brings structured input to the CNIL. In that sense, we act as a filter and as a translator. This is also a question of efficiency. A supervisory authority cannot efficiently speak individually with several thousand DPOs, and several thousand DPOs cannot efficiently address the authority one by one. An association helps organize the dialogue. We had a very concrete example recently with a question raised by several organizations following cookie-related formal notices sent by the CNIL. Instead of each DPO contacting the CNIL separately, we organized the discussion with the DPOs concerned, consolidated the issues, and raised them collectively to the CNIL. This is the same logic for public consultation. And this is also another benefit. It partly pseudonymizes the discussion. The authority receives the substance of the question, but individual DPOs are not necessarily exposed. We also act as a protective screen vis-à-vis the DPO's employer, which can be very reassuring for members and encourages them to share more openly. But the bridge also works in the other direction. The FCDP is not only the voice for DPO communities towards the CNIL, we also help relay the CNIL's work to the DPO community. The CNIL produces a lot of guidance tools, webinars, sectoral resources, and public consultation, and we help give visibility to that work, share it with our members, invite CNIL representatives to our event, and even co-organize events with the CNIL. We can also help the CNIL identify the right expert or the right sectoral contact when it wants to understand a specific issue better. So in a way, we are both a voice of the DPO community and a relay for the supervisory authority.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Very interesting. Paul, how, in your view, regulators should engage better with practitioners? Everybody likes time and resources, and so how to be efficient for this interaction?
That's a great question, and I think Thomas made a lot of relative points, and also I agree with what Daniel was saying about, obviously, with regards to enforcement, there's not really a role for DPOs, but there are roles for DPOs in their relationships with DPAs with regard to, I would say, guidance. Quite often there's a perception that a lot of DPAs release guidance very much in tune with their own thinking and process. And I think we need to align a lot of that guidance with the guidance that's coming out from the EDPB. If we go to the Helsinki statement of last year, I think there was a very good point made in that statement where we talked about strategic cross-border topics when they arise. It would be desirable for DPAs to actually prioritize those areas from an EU position, and I think that would help with consistency by design within guidance. A lot of DPOs are obviously and data protection practitioners. They're waiting for a lot of guidance, and quite often there's a sense that guidance can arrive late. It could be slightly too abstract or doesn't necessarily reflect operational reality. And I think with that in mind, there are some sort of areas where DPAs, national DPAs, or maybe even at the European level, could improve. For example, I think, obviously, if you take the context of the controller versus the DPO, the controller wants less regulation by default. The controller typically wants less regulation to have to comply with. And where the data protection officer or the data protection practitioner is there to protect the obligations or the requirements under the GDPR. So as you said, Daniel, it's a bit of a testy situation there. However, having said that, I think what DPAs could envisage in the future is maybe have permanent practitioner advisory panels at a national level or even at the European level. And I would say this really from a DPO perspective, as opposed to just from the industry perspective. So obviously, within DPAs and also within associations, we have sectoral working groups on health, retail, SMEs, and so forth. But I think you really need to look at the operational reality from the DPO's working perspective. So, for example, there could be annual structured meetings with data protection officer associations, and possibly even early stage testing of draft guidance within a sort of a sandbox type environment, which I think DPAs could probably organise ad hocly with national DPO associations, because then obviously you would obviously bring in operational privacy teams to actually look at potential guidance and what would be its impact. And I think that would also help to improve the clarity, the implementation of such guidance, and obviously provide consistency across the EU. So I think that's certainly an area that is of increasingly importance. Also, there's, the modern privacy programs within organizations and teams are multidisciplinarian. So I think, there needs to be an increased, the DPAs need to seek a more increased engagement with non-lawyer practitioners. I think to date, obviously since the advent of GDPR, there's been a preponderance of lawyer profiles within DPOs, and I think that's decreasing. I think there are more people coming into the field of data protection from outside the legal profession. And if you look at the modern privacy programs, obviously taking the EU digital regime, such as, having to deal with emerging technologies and AI and so forth, DPAs will probably need to engage much more with solution architects, AI governance leads, engineering type profiles, product teams. I think that's something that's going to add a lot more weight to the work of DPAs as the GDPR intersects with different aspects of the EU digital regime. So I think certainly that is something that we're seeing also within our own member associations. For example, I take the Spanish member association, APEP. Last year, they formally changed their name and mission statement to APEP IA, which is obviously AI. And so they are much more embracing now of AI as a very key component to the work of DPOs and data protection practitioners. And so I think we're going to see an increasing trend in that regard. I mean, I like to use the term data governance more, sort of not just to look at areas of AI governance, but if you take the Data Act, it's all about data sharing. There's obviously intersects with competition law and so forth. So I think we're going to see a sort of an evolution of data protection officers, if they so choose, because some data protection officers literally want to stay within the confines of the GDPR. But I think you're seeing a growing number of DPOs who see an evolution, not only within the GDPR. I mean, obviously we have the omnibus as well. We have to see the outcome of the omnibus simplification exercise. But I think we're going to see a growing number, and we are seeing a growing number of DPOs that are taking on the responsibilities of AI governance, digital governance, ethics governance, risk governance. And so I think there's a lot of different areas of play from a compliance perspective and governance perspective within organizations. And I think DPAs need to look at that evolution for their own evolution as well. So I think, taking into account obviously the Helsinki statement, which obviously you know very well, Isabel, I think that's a very good step forward. And I think we just need to see it going into practice now, and hopefully, there can be a greater rationalization of resources at the national level to also help the European level. Because I think obviously that's one of the key areas of risk for DPOs is seeing different interpretations of guidance, or guidance that is not particularly strong coming out of some of the national DPAs. So we're all part of this shared ecosystem, be it DPOs, DPAs, and controllers. I think we all have a role to play to ensure that we have a seamless approach to data protection going, advancing into the digital age. And I think that's also important for Europe's overall competitiveness and innovation. So I think, more efforts in that respect and efficiency of resources, both also from the DPO associations as well as from DPAs and controllers. And I think we're on a good path.
Yeah, I think you touched different points that are very interesting, and I see also similarities between the evolution of the DPA's competence, scope, and profiles of workers, and at the same times of DPOs. With the new digital regulation, expansion on the AI, then DPOs are becoming competent for more activities than other, and then within the DPAs as well. Because in the EDPB, European Data Protection Board, we are working on a series of guidance on the intersection between the DMA and the GDPR, AI Act and GDPR, DSA and the GDPR, and then we're expanding our scope nationally as well in the DPAs.
Yeah, that's really important. I think that's
and then also the change of profile, because we need indeed not only legal officers, but to have also more IT background. We can see that, for instance, in the DPAs that are existing for longer, they even when the more people they have, they can also afford to have those kind of the more IT teams. And you also made reference to the Helsinki statement, and I would like to make a point on it, because indeed what we committed at the European Data Protection Board is to have more contact with stakeholders, and I can hear your voice that we need to make maybe a separation, a differentiation between hearing the business and association, etc., and the DPOs that are another type of public that maybe we need also to, we are already doing, but this is something that I will take on board. And also that we decided that we are going to hear also the stakeholders before making the guidance. So meaning that because we always organize stakeholder consultation at the end, written consultation when there was a guidance being adopted, but we wanted to make it upfront to try to identify the questions that will be asked, or the topic where there is a problem of consistency, etc. And then maybe I take note also of the ideas of having then a conversation with an opportunity for DPO to be there. And then indeed you underline an important point of this Helsinki statement to bring more consistency. The idea is that when there will be topic that is strategic cross-border, instead of making it at national level, each of them, and then after to have a European cooperation and to try to have a consistency, the idea it would be to try to ask the DPA to put the resource directly at European level to benefit everybody and to have also consistency by design. And I know that there are, I've been to a conference where the Belgium DPA really committed to do that and reduce the staff for the national guidance to put it at the European level and to have this work. So,
I think that's great. I mean, these are areas which I think, obviously when the GDPR came out, it was relatively novel as a piece of legislation in some regards, and I think, it takes time for law to embed and for regulation to become, for people to become comfortable with regulation. So I think we've made some great progress in the last. We're coming up to 10 years of the GDPR, but I think there's a lot more that can be done, and certainly I think to all the points that Thomas made also about DPOs, having felt probably more isolated at the beginning of when the GDPR came into force. I think a lot of that is now beginning to subside, and DPOs have gained a lot more confidence in the role and more acceptance within organizations. But I think obviously there's still some way to go in the sense that it's always a learning curve. There's always, and we're always continuously learning, and I think that it's important to stress that, not only just in the profession of data protection, but in all professions.
Thank you, Paul. I think it's time now for having some Q&A session. So is there anyone willing to ask a question? I can see already 2 persons.
Good morning. I'm Maris Rukers from Latvia, working also sometimes as DPO. My question is about DPO effectiveness, how we can measure it, because this profession is between controller and supervisory institution, and sometimes controller don't ask all the questions. Sometimes they don't take in account all advice. So, and the problem is that we say that DPO is independent, but as you know, the more independent, the more problems, because in government you have in the country the checks and balances system that nobody is very independent. Government, parliament, everybody is in the same level. What about DPO? It's very independent position, but how we can measure in these obstacles? How can we measure the effectiveness of the work, the results? Do we have some information about not good work of DPO or bad work or etc. What is your comments about this?
Thank you very much for the question. I will first provide you information that when the EDPB organized this coordinated enforcement framework, we did produce a report. So we consulted, I think on pan-European level, it was 62,000 organizations, and we got like 17,000 replies. And then we produced some kind of statistics as well on that. And there were questions on whether the position of the DPO was in practice followed within the organization. And I think the rating was quite good for that one. And then there were also you can find also some figures about the question of the independence. And there, I think they were also by countries that you can see the results. And indeed, sometimes the DPOs were a bit too close or even making part of the decision-making body and confusing the role of the controller and the role of the DPO. Maybe I can turn to you, Daniel. I don't know. Do you have any KPI to try to measure your efficiency within Uber?
Definitely not. No, I think, it's super hard to measure the effectiveness of a DPO. And as a separate question, it is super hard to measure independence. Independence is an attitude, is a way of work, and is a way of how we operate as a data protection office. Nobody tells us what to do. We determine what we do. We determine the advice we give. And sometimes the controller follows the advice. Sometimes they don't, and then they'll just have to document why not. But it's super hard to measure, because if they always follow our advice, does that make us less independent? If they never do, does that make us less independent? It is a mindset, and it is a way you have to operate. And I think you need to document it as an organization, as a controller, how that DPO functions, what their responsibilities are, how their independence is guaranteed. But as soon as that is structured, they have their independent budget, et cetera, they just have to do that in a proper way. And like you asked, I don't really have a KPI, and I wouldn't know how to measure my independence. If anybody thinks of something, then please email me as well. It's first name, last name @uber.com. I'd be very interested. But I do feel we do have a very independent data protection office, and I feel no need to add a KPI to it.
So maybe, I don't know, Paul, Thomas, do you want to add anything on that?
No, I think I'd have to agree with Daniel. I think it's sort of the $1 million question. How do you measure effectiveness and independence? I think at the end of the day, whether you're a DPO, whether you're a marketing manager, whether you're a communications officer, whatever you are within a company, independence is a very subjective and objective at the same time, very, very difficult to define. And I think at the end of the day, we're all political animals within our organizations. Obviously, the independence is something that's quite important from the point of view of ensuring appropriate and good, appropriate personal data processing and good practice within organizations. But I think at the same time, a DPO shouldn't try to isolate itself from the organization. So it is a fine balance. You do have to work with other functions within your organization, within the controlling organization as well. And so from that perspective, I think you have to strike a balance between the business objectives and good practice in data processing. And I think that's the important thing to communicate within organizations, is that you're not simply there as a sort of an auditor, if you want, or an extension of the DPA, because you're not. You're there within your organization to provide good advice and good practice to your product teams, to your organizational teams and business functions on how to do good data processing. And I think that is, you have to be a sort of a business enabler in that regard, and sort of, bring home this concept that good data governance is trust to the marketplace as well. So I think it's just striking that balance. But I think the independence, is very subjective, and it depends on the business culture as well. There's not one size fits all, and some organizations have much more resources than others. But I think just as Daniel said, if anyone has the golden answer to this, you can email me as well, because I'm sure all our members would like to know that as well.
But I think that one day, if you manage to bring a project where the CEO of the organization is abiding, and you can meet the business objective while having compliance. Exactly. And also, I don't know, when they were like those BCR being adopted within the organization, I can tell you that the DPOs were really like in heaven, because they managed to convince the CEO that was really important, and they board of. So that's also why how you can make. I can see that you wanted from the audience to intervene on that question. So, but there is a need to have a mic there. If I understand well, you were part of this support group of DPO for the DPS?
Yes, I am actually the Data Protection Officer of the External Action Service. My name is Emese Savoia-Keleti. Thank you for the panel, and thank you for Benedict introducing this initiative and the cooperation between the DPO network and the DPS. And I have a little comment, or if I may attempt to answer this question. I think for me, the biggest efficiency measure would be the awareness raising what I have done. Of course, it's difficult to measure by numbers, but maybe by your consultations or the request that you receive from your own organization is a feedback. The fact, okay, I am in a lucky position because I have been working with the ES for a long time, but I am really trying to put and bring forward and be there for the colleagues. I'm organizing every year the Data Protection Day, and basically the awareness raising that colleagues come to me, and they also use my own personal email. I have a lot which I need to transfer to the DPO functional mailbox because they just, Emese, yeah, I have this question. And so they have this trust to talk to me, and they, I think, find that, I try to provide this independent advice that you have mentioned, Daniel, and then I also relate to Paul, of course, that yeah, we have to strengthen this trust, but I think this awareness raising element is something that is very useful.
Thank you very much. And this is also something that you can measure then if you're making tests and you see that it's improving. I think there was another question on the left side of the audience.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
I'm co-curating this DPO track, so thank you for this wonderful panel. I'm a DPO in public sector, but I'm also a board member of DPO Pro, which is the Belgian professional association for and by DPOs. I wanted to pick in on something that Daniel said about the collaboration between DPOs and DPAs. Because I did some reflection, so it's not really a question, it's more of a reflection. But I think everything is coming together with my reflection because it's also about awareness. What I find is that a lot of DPOs tend to be hesitant to cooperate with DPAs because of the enforcement aspects. But I think we often forget that enforcement is a means to an end. For me, if I explain about GDPR and what's been new comparing to the directive, enforcement for me, the sanctions, the other corrective measures is a tool to make sure that we all comply to the principles. And I think that is something that we can also strengthen the awareness, we as DPOs, but also from the DPAs, that we should let fear, wave away. We're in the maritime, or go in the ocean. That we should not think too much in fear, but that actually, if we cooperate more with DPAs, it can be really win-win situation. And I think we often forget that also of DPOs, because I had some recent conversations with DPOs. They say, yeah, but our confidentiality is also towards the controller or the processor that we work for. I don't agree. I think our confidentiality is towards the data subjects. And so we can speak freely to DPAs, but on the condition that those DPAs don't use that information against us and against controllers. And so there should be a strict division between the advisory role and the enforcement role, so that we can also, in those audits or in those inspections, that we can see it as a positive thing, as, okay, we're growing, and as an organization, this audit, this sanction has learned us something, so we can move on. And I think that's something that we often forget. We act on fear, we avoid contacting DPAs because we are afraid. And in Belgium, I'm sorry to say, at some point we had reason to, because a lot of DPOs were individually attacked. So I think now it's better, but so I think that's really important, that it's really in the vision of, okay, we're all trying to get better, and because also with data breaches, we shouldn't be afraid of that, because everybody gets breached and it will only get worse. But we should see it as a means to grow and to better implement the principles. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
But that is also why the National Data Protection Association is the voice for the DPOs, so that you can speak with a certain amount of anonymity. So it's the National Association that speaks on your behalf.
Yeah,
I just wanted
this
to
is
say
what
that.
Thomas explained earlier. Thank you very much for having engaged also with us. It was very interesting panel. Thanks to all the panelists. You join them. Need to applaud them.